Lady Boulay, and I hope you're having a marvelous day. Thank you for your support. Thank you for subscribing to the channel. Thank you for your thumbs up, for your comments, and thank you for sharing the videos. Thank you for all you do to support the channel. Well, on this Juneteenth, I am looking back over our history and the history of our ancestors, remembering that Juneteenth is a celebration of the end of slavery in Texas. In September of 1862, Abraham Lincoln signed the Emancipation Proclamation, which was to go into effect on January 1st, 1863. It applied only to the slaves that were living in states that had seceded from the Union. These are the states that had left the United States of America and formed their own country called the Confederate States of America: South Carolina, Alabama, Mississippi, North Carolina, Florida, Texas, Georgia, Tennessee, Louisiana, Virginia, and Arkansas. These are the states that were fighting against the United States in the Civil War. And Lincoln freed the slaves that were living in these states. And you can see that Texas is on the list. So the enslaved people living in Texas should have been freed on January 1st, 1863. The Emancipation Proclamation only applied to those states that I just read, but there were slaves in 4 other states called border states that were not freed. And these are the states: Maryland, Missouri, Kentucky, and Delaware. If you were enslaved in one of those states, the Emancipation Proclamation did not free you. The freedom that the Emancipation Proclamation promised depended upon the United States Army, the Union Army, winning. If the Confederate Army had won that war, the Emancipation Proclamation would not have meant anything. So in order for the Emancipation Proclamation to truly take effect, the Union Army had to win that war. After Lincoln issued the Emancipation Proclamation, the Union Army began accepting black men into the Army and the Navy. It is important to note that up to that point, the Confederate Army was winning. The South was winning the war, even though the North had more soldiers and more ammunition. They were not winning. Black men entered that war in 1862. More importantly, and this information for some reason does not get out, almost 200,000 black soldiers and sailors fought for the Union and for their freedom. And white people will say this: well, we fought for your freedom. They fought for their own freedom. Enslaved people and free blacks fought in that war for their own freedom, because the free blacks were free, but they also were subjected to some of the restrictions that were put up on the slaves. This is very, very important. Black people fought for their own freedom. It wasn't white people out there fighting to free black people. White people were fighting for whatever they were fighting for to restore the Union. Black people were fighting for their freedom, and they fought. And it was only after black soldiers entered that war that the Union Army started winning. So the slaves in Texas should have been freed on January 1st, 1863, but they were not freed. Now, nobody ever asked the question, how come they weren't freed? Well, because the people who were supposed to tell them that they were free did not tell them. The enslaved people could not read, remember that? So they couldn't read the newspaper, or they couldn't run to the telegraph office and find out what the people were talking about. Some of them did sneak around and find out what was going on. But the fact is, many of them did not know that they were free. So it was June 19th, 1865, that they were finally told by the Union soldiers they were free. That's after the Civil War was over. They spent almost 2.5 years longer in slavery than they should have. So this is why we're celebrating Juneteenth. They talk about Juneteenth, but they're not telling us why those people did not know they were free. So they'd already spent 246 years in bondage, The president had freed them through an executive order, but they didn't get the word. So they had to spend 2.5 years more in slavery. Now, if you were to go back and ask those people, they will probably tell you that they didn't even hate white people. So this is the question I'm asking. Why don't black Americans hate white Americans? Now, white Americans run around here making a big deal about not liking black people. We already know that. Black people always talk about white people's hatred of black people. But you do not hear black people running around saying that they hate white people. Why? There are many things that have gone on in the United States of America that a lesser group of people would hate the people if it happened to them. Black Americans as a whole do not hate white people, do not hate white Americans. Now, I'm not saying there aren't some black people that hate white people. Maybe they do, but most of us don't. Now, I'm going to give you the reason why I think black Americans don't hate white Americans, but I'm going to first give some reasons why, if we were a lesser group of people, we would. Number one, 246 years of chattel slavery, where you had no control over yourself, your family, your children, where you lived, or how you were treated. 246 years. And then after those 246 years, you were supposedly freed, but then another 100 years of de facto slavery called Jim Crow was added. So that was another 100 years, more or less. That's 350 years of people really being in captivity. And during that Jim Crow era, we had, I think somebody said it was 40 massacres, and that included Black Wall Street in Oklahoma, but there were many more. We had lynchings, destruction of property. No sooner did black people buy land than they found a way to take it back away from them. Inventions were stolen, intellectual property was stolen. Just about everything that you can do to a race of people was done. And the only reason that it wasn't done was because it wasn't thought of. There was no protection under the law. The 14th Amendment to the Constitution had granted them equal protection under the law. But during that Jim Crow era, all of their rights, including due process and equal protection under the law, were ignored. It was open season on black Americans for a very long time. The reality of black and white America is, every time we try to build an infrastructure for ourselves, segregated and separate from white people, they would find a reason to come in, shoot it up, blow it up, tear it up, burn it up. And a lot of black people ended up being dead. That's our history. This is not something that was made up. This is documented. They have documented this. So we don't have to lie. Because remember, whatever white people do, they'll write it down. So it's written down. In American history, this is American history. I don't pretend to know all that there is to know in the natural or the spirit world. But I do believe that what has sustained and kept black Americans in this country is that there is a divine ruler, a supreme being who rules and super rules over this universe. I always say that when those slave ships left out of Africa with the cargo, which was our ancestors, there were also ships coming out of Europe with decent white people on board, because the divine creator knew that that cargo, which was our ancestors, was going to need those decent white people for what they were going to have to go through. And they have been decent white people. The abolitionists were decent white people. They risked their own lives and livelihood to try to help the enslaved people because they didn't believe in slavery. There have been federal judges in the South who have ruled on civil rights cases that benefited black people, pretty much the way the Supreme Court did last week, letting Alabama know that you are violating the voting rights of black Alabamians. So we have our crowd. It's not a lot, but it's enough, and it's always been enough. That's one reason why black people don't hate white people. Because after all is done and all that is said and done, there's always going to be a white person or a few white people who are going to try to do what's right. In my own childhood, the Ku Klux Klan used to ride on a Saturday night or on a Friday night or whenever they felt like it. But there would always be some white person that would come across the tracks and tell some black person what they had in mind in their way of trying to help the colored people. So there's always been some decent white people, and we can't deny that. Even though it may not be a lot, it's enough. So that's the main reason that black people don't hate white people. But the reason that I believe that black people truly do not hate white people is because I believe that black people are operating on a higher spiritual vibration than white people. Now, there are some horrible black people. I'm not saying that. Black people who will do a whole lot. I mean, there are black people who are criminals. There are black people who will do what anybody else will do. But as a whole, black people do not hate white people. We do not plot against them to do mean things. Whatever black people do is things that would be in self-defense. And it ain't nothing wrong, and there is nothing wrong with people defending themselves. But we don't plot and plan and build our lives around thinking of stuff that we can do to hurt them. We don't do that. And I believe that many of us believe that many white people do that. But again, because there's the remnant, the 10th or the remnant that has been set aside in the white race to do the work of the divine creator is what allows us to at least retain our humanity and our sanity. Now, there is a third reason why I believe that black Americans do not hate white people. And I believe there is something innate inside of us that believes that we are maybe superior. And superior is probably not the right word, but I believe that we have something in us that makes us believe that we're better than that. I believe it's there, whether we will admit it or not. I believe that there is something inside of black people, black Americans, whose ancestors came through slavery, made it through slavery, and came out with our dignity and our sanity intact. Still had the willingness to work together, even to work with white people, without hatred or animosity. That is a very unique race of people. So our humanity is not in question, and that is why we do not hate white people. So I'm going to make the claim that black Americans do not hate white people. I'm talking about the collective. I don't believe that black people necessarily like white people, and I don't think black people trust white people, but that's different from hating them. Now, y'all can disagree with me, but that is what I believe based on what I have lived and what I have observed. And the reason that we don't hate white people is, number one, there is a remnant of white people in every part of the country who will endeavor to do what is right. It may not be a lot, but it's enough. And number two, I truly believe that black Americans operate on a higher spiritual vibration than white Americans. Now that might sound, I don't know, that might sound prejudice, but it doesn't, I don't mean it to be prejudice. I really believe it. Studies show black people go to church more, they pray more, and they read the Bible more than white people. And if anybody is going to forgive somebody for doing something heinous to them or somebody they love, it's going to be black people. And finally, and I know this is going to ruffle some feathers, but I believe that black people are the superior race. We are the first in creation, and I believe we were given the best. And that, I think, makes us superior to others in many ways. But what say you? Let me know what you think about that. And if you think black people do hate white people, let me know that too. But at any rate, let me know what you think about it. Thank you for listening. Subscribe to the channel. Give me a thumbs up. Leave a comment. Share the video. And as always, have a great day.